Sarah Martinez had worked at the Department of Defense facility for 3 years without anyone questioning her presence. She arrived each morning at exactly 7:30 a.m., badge in hand, walking through the same security checkpoints as hundreds of other employees. The guards knew her face, nodded politely, and waved her through without a second thought. Her desk sat in a corner of the administrative wing, surrounded by filing cabinets and the quiet hum of computers processing routine paperwork. Most people assumed she was just another clerk. Her clothes were simple and professional but not expensive. She drove a modest Honda Civic that had seen better days. During lunch breaks, she ate sandwiches from home while others went to fancy restaurants. When meetings happened in the conference rooms, Sarah was often the person taking notes in the background, rarely speaking unless someone asked her a direct question. The facility itself was enormous, spanning several city blocks with multiple buildings connected by underground tunnels. Different areas required different levels of security clearance. Most employees could access only their immediate work areas and common spaces like the cafeteria and parking garage. Sarah's daily routine took her through the same familiar paths, and she seemed content with her quiet role in the massive organization. But things began to change when budget cuts hit the department. New management arrived with fresh ideas about efficiency and cost reduction. They brought clipboards, spreadsheets, and a determination to eliminate what they called redundant positions. The new deputy director, James Crawford, was particularly aggressive about finding people to let go. Crawford had come from a private consulting firm that specialized in government reorganization. He wore expensive suits and carried himself with the confidence of someone who believed he could fix any problem with the right data analysis. His first week on the job involved walking through every department, asking pointed questions about job functions and productivity metrics. Sarah first noticed the changes when Crawford appeared in her section with 2 assistants carrying tablets and measuring tapes. They spent an entire afternoon documenting workstations, counting computers, and timing how long different tasks took to complete. Crawford made notes about everything, occasionally stopping to ask employees about their daily responsibilities. When he reached Sarah's desk, Crawford paused longer than usual. He flipped through papers, examined her computer screen, and asked about the filing system she maintained. Sarah explained that she managed various administrative records and helped coordinate communications between different departments. Crawford nodded but seemed skeptical about the necessity of her position. Over the following weeks, rumors spread throughout the facility about upcoming layoffs. People whispered in hallways about who might be safe and who might receive termination notices. The atmosphere grew tense as employees tried to prove their value while simultaneously preparing for the worst-case scenario. Sarah continued her work without showing any signs of concern. She arrived at the same time each morning, completed her tasks with the same quiet efficiency, and left at exactly 5 p.m. each evening. Her colleagues began to worry about her apparent lack of anxiety, assuming she either didn't understand the gravity of the situation or had already accepted her likely fate. The truth was that Sarah understood the situation perfectly well. She had survived similar reorganizations before, though her co-workers didn't know about her previous experiences. Her calm demeanor came from years of learning that panic and office politics rarely changed outcomes when higher-level decisions were being made. Crawford's team worked systematically through each department, creating detailed reports about staffing levels and operational costs. They held meetings with department heads, analyzed workflow patterns, and developed recommendations for streamlining operations. Sarah's name appeared on multiple lists as someone whose position could potentially be eliminated without significant impact on overall productivity. The irony was that Sarah actually played a more important role than most people realized. Her filing system contained backup records for critical projects that spanned multiple departments. Her coordination work helped prevent communication breakdowns that could have caused serious problems. But, because her contributions were largely invisible, they didn't show up in the efficiency reports that Crawford's team was generating. 3 months after Crawford's arrival, the first round of layoffs was announced. 12 people received termination notices, including several who had worked at the facility for over a decade. The news sent shock waves through the organization as people realized that seniority and institutional knowledge weren't necessarily protection against budget cuts. Sarah's name wasn't on the first list, but she knew that more cuts were coming. Crawford had made it clear that the initial round was just the beginning of a comprehensive restructuring process. He scheduled additional meetings with remaining staff to discuss optimizing human resources for maximum operational efficiency. During this period, Sarah began receiving unusual requests for information. Other departments started asking for access to files that she maintained, particularly older records that weren't available in digital format. Some of these requests came from senior officials who rarely interacted with administrative staff directly. One afternoon, a colonel from the Strategic Planning Division came to Sarah's desk personally instead of sending an assistant. He needed copies of communications records from a project that had ended 5 years earlier. Sarah located the files quickly and made copies, but she noticed that the colonel seemed surprised by how efficiently she handled his request. Similar incidents happened several times over the following weeks. Senior staff members who had never spoken to Sarah before began approaching her directly for assistance with records requests. They seemed impressed by her knowledge of the filing systems and her ability to locate obscure documents quickly. Sarah realized that these interactions were creating a paper trail of her value to the organization, but she wasn't sure if Crawford's team was paying attention to this kind of informal feedback. The efficiency experts seemed more interested in quantifiable metrics than in the subtle ways that institutional knowledge contributed to smooth operations. As the second round of evaluations approached, Sarah's colleagues began treating her with a mixture of sympathy and resignation. They assumed she would be among the next group of people to receive termination notices. Her quiet demeanor and low-profile position made her seem like an obvious target for elimination. But Sarah had one advantage that nobody knew about, including Crawford and his efficiency team. Hidden in her personnel file was information that would surprise everyone who thought they understood her role in the organization. The problem was that this information was classified at a level that most people at the facility weren't authorized to access. The security system that protected this information was designed to prevent unauthorized disclosure, but it would also prevent Sarah from defending herself when her position came under scrutiny. She couldn't explain why her job was actually more important than it appeared without revealing details that were above most people's clearance level. As Crawford's investigation continued, Sarah found herself in an impossible situation. She could see the axe falling, but the very security protocols that protected sensitive information also prevented her from protecting herself. All she could do was continue her work and hope that someone with appropriate clearance would recognize the value of what she did before it was too late. The tension in the facility continued to build as more employees received termination notices. People who had felt secure in their positions suddenly found themselves updating resumes and searching for new jobs. The atmosphere became increasingly desperate as everyone tried to prove their indispensability to an organization that seemed determined to operate with fewer people. Sarah watched this drama unfold with the detached interest of someone who had seen similar situations before. She knew that institutional panic rarely led to rational decision-making, and that the people making cuts often didn't fully understand the consequences of their choices until after the damage was done. But she also knew that eventually, someone would need access to information that only she could provide. When that moment came, the real test would begin. The question was whether it would happen before Crawford's efficiency team decided that her position was expendable. The facility's security systems held the answer to Sarah's true value, but accessing that information required clearance levels that most people didn't possess. Until someone with the right authorization looked into her background, she would remain vulnerable to the same cost-cutting measures that had already claimed the jobs of her colleagues. Sarah continued her daily routine, maintaining the same professional demeanor that had served her well for 3 years. But now she was waiting for something more than just the end of another workday. She was waiting for the moment when her real identity would be revealed, one way or another. As the meeting that would change everything was scheduled for a Wednesday morning in Conference Room B, Crawford had called together his core team of efficiency experts along with department heads to review the next phase of personnel reductions. Sarah's name was prominently featured on the list of proposed eliminations, highlighted in red ink with a note about minimal operational impact. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, the facility's deputy administrator, sat at the far end of the conference table reviewing personnel files. She had been with the organization for 15 years and had survived multiple reorganizations by keeping her head down and focusing on her technical responsibilities. But something about the current process bothered her, particularly the speed with which Crawford was making decisions about people he had known for only a few months. Crawford opened the meeting with his usual PowerPoint presentation filled with charts showing cost savings and efficiency improvements. He clicked through slides highlighting the success of the first round of layoffs, pointing out that operations had continued smoothly despite the reduction in staff. His confidence was infectious, and several department heads nodded approvingly as he outlined plans for additional cuts. When Sarah's name appeared on the screen, Crawford spent less than 2 minutes explaining his reasoning. Her position was described as administrative support with limited scope and easily absorbed by existing clerical staff. He noted that her salary and benefits could be eliminated with minimal disruption to daily operations. Dr. Chen raised her hand during the presentation. She had been thinking about several recent incidents where Sarah had provided crucial assistance with records requests, particularly for projects involving sensitive information. Something about Crawford's casual dismissal of Sarah's value didn't align with Chen's observations about how the woman actually functioned within the organization. "I have some concerns about this particular recommendation," Chen said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who rarely spoke unless she had something important to say. "Ms. Martinez has been handling some fairly complex coordination tasks that might be more difficult to replace than this analysis suggests." Crawford looked mildly annoyed by the interruption. He had anticipated some pushback from department heads who were naturally protective of their staff, but he had prepared responses for most objections. "Can you be more specific about these coordination tasks? Our analysis shows primarily routine filing and basic administrative support." Chen paused, realizing that she was entering delicate territory. Some of the projects that Sarah had assisted with involved classified information that couldn't be discussed in a room full of people without appropriate clearances. "I think we should conduct a more thorough review of her actual responsibilities before making a final decision." The suggestion sparked a debate around the conference table. Several department heads supported the idea of additional review, while Crawford's team argued that they had already conducted comprehensive analysis of all positions under consideration. The discussion continued for nearly an hour without reaching a clear resolution. Finally, Crawford agreed to a compromise. He would postpone Sarah's termination for 2 weeks while Dr. Chen conducted her additional review. But he made it clear that he expected concrete justification for keeping the position, not vague concerns about coordination tasks that nobody could clearly define. After the meeting, Chen walked directly to the security office on the facility's second floor. She had decided that the only way to properly evaluate Sarah's value to the organization was to examine her complete personnel file, including any classified information that might explain her actual role. Captain Rodriguez, the facility security officer, was initially reluctant to provide access to classified personnel records without a specific operational reason. But Chen's senior status and her explanation of the budgetary review convinced him to authorize a limited examination of Sarah's background information. What Chen discovered in the secure database shocked her completely. Sarah's personnel file contained information that transformed everything about how her position should be viewed. The woman who appeared to be a simple administrative clerk was actually someone with an extraordinary background and current responsibilities that went far beyond anything Crawford's team had identified. The file revealed that Sarah Martinez was actually Dr. Sarah Martinez, holder of a PhD in Information Systems Security from MIT. Her previous employment history included 5 years with the National Security Agency and 3 years with the Defense Intelligence Agency. She had been recruited to her current position specifically because of her expertise in managing sensitive information flows between different government departments. But the most surprising information was her current security clearance level. Sarah held top-secret/SCI clearance with additional special access authorizations that fewer than 50 people in the entire facility possessed. Her seemingly routine administrative work was actually a carefully designed cover for monitoring and coordinating information sharing between multiple intelligence agencies. Chen stared at the computer screen in disbelief. Sarah's job description in the classified system bore no resemblance to the position that Crawford's team had been analyzing. Instead of filing routine paperwork, she was responsible for maintaining communication channels for some of the most sensitive intelligence operations in the government. The more Chen read, the more she understood why Sarah had maintained such a low profile. Her position required her to appear unremarkable while actually serving as a critical liaison between different intelligence community elements. The quiet efficiency that made her seem expendable was actually a carefully cultivated professional persona designed to avoid attracting attention to her real work. Chen also discovered that several of the senior officials who had recently requested assistance from Sarah were actually receiving intelligence briefings through carefully disguised information transfers. What appeared to be routine records requests were actually part of ongoing classified operations that Sarah coordinated without most people realizing what was happening. The security protocols surrounding Sarah's position were so sophisticated that even Chen's review was being logged in, would likely trigger questions from higher authorities about why someone was examining the classified aspects of Sarah's role. Chen realized that she had stumbled into a situation that was far more complex than a simple personnel review. She printed out the portions of Sarah's file that she was authorized to access and returned to her office to consider her options. The information she had discovered made it clear that eliminating Sarah's position would be catastrophic for ongoing intelligence operations, but explaining this to Crawford would require revealing classified information to someone who didn't have appropriate clearance. Chen spent the rest of the day making discreet phone calls to contacts in other agencies who might be able to provide guidance on how to handle the situation. She learned that similar incidents had occurred at other facilities where cost-cutting measures had inadvertently targeted intelligence personnel who were working under administrative cover. The challenge was protecting Sarah's position without compromising the security protocols that made her work possible. Chen couldn't simply tell Crawford that Sarah was more important than she appeared without revealing information that could damage ongoing operations. Meanwhile, Sarah continued her daily routine, unaware that her background was being investigated. She had lived with the possibility of discovery for 3 years, knowing that bureaucratic changes could eventually expose her real role. But she had hoped to complete her current assignment before that happened. Sarah's actual mission involved monitoring potential security breaches within the facility itself. Her position gave her access to communication patterns and records that could reveal insider threats or foreign intelligence penetration attempts. The work required extraordinary discretion and the ability to identify subtle patterns that might indicate compromise of sensitive information. Over the previous 6 months, Sarah had been tracking several concerning incidents that suggested possible unauthorized access to classified systems. Her investigation was approaching a critical phase where she expected to identify the source of the security problems. Losing her position now would not only end this investigation but could also alert potential hostile actors that their activities had been detected. Chen struggled with how to communicate the importance of Sarah's work without violating security protocols. She considered arranging a meeting with Crawford and a representative from the intelligence community who could provide appropriate context, but such a meeting would itself raise questions about why a routine personnel decision required intelligence community involvement. The 2-week deadline for additional review was approaching quickly, and Chen knew that Crawford would not accept vague explanations about Sarah's importance. She needed to find a way to demonstrate Sarah's value that would satisfy Crawford's demands for concrete justification without compromising ongoing operations. The solution, when it finally occurred to Chen, was both elegant and risky. Instead of explaining Sarah's classified role, she would create a situation where Sarah's unique capabilities would become obvious to everyone involved. The plan would require careful timing and some degree of luck, but it offered the best chance of protecting Sarah's position without revealing information that could damage national security. Chen began making arrangements for what she privately called the demonstration. If everything went according to plan, Crawford would discover Sarah's true value in a way that would make further questions unnecessary. But if the plan failed, both Chen and Sarah could find themselves in serious trouble with their respective oversight authorities. The stage was being set for a confrontation that would reveal the true nature of Sarah's work, one way or another. The opportunity Chen had been waiting for arrived on a Thursday morning in the form of a security alert that would test everyone's assumptions about Sarah Martinez. At 9:15 a.m., the facility's intrusion detection systems identified unauthorized access attempts on several classified computer networks. The attacks were sophisticated, using techniques that suggested either foreign intelligence operatives or highly skilled insider threats. Crawford was in his office reviewing termination paperwork when Captain Rodriguez burst through the door without knocking. The security officer's face was pale, and his usual calm demeanor had been replaced by barely controlled urgency. "Sir, we have a major security incident developing. I need to brief you immediately on protocols for potential intelligence breaches." Within minutes, the facility's Emergency Operations Center was buzzing with activity. Computer specialists worked frantically to trace the source of the attacks while security personnel began implementing lockdown procedures. Crawford found himself thrust into a situation that his private sector experience had never prepared him to handle. The attacks were coming from multiple directions simultaneously, suggesting a coordinated effort by highly sophisticated adversaries. Someone was attempting to access personnel records, operational plans, and communication logs for several ongoing intelligence operations. The facility's automated defenses were holding for now, but the attackers were adapting their techniques faster than the security systems could respond. Dr. Chin arrived at the operations center within 20 minutes of the initial alert, her usual composed manner replaced by the focused intensity of someone who understood exactly how serious the situation had become. She immediately began coordinating with various agency representatives who were participating in the response through secure communication channels. Crawford watched the controlled chaos around him with growing alarm. People were speaking in acronyms he didn't recognize, referencing procedures he had never heard of, and making decisions based on protocols that weren't covered in any of the management training he had received. For the first time since arriving at the facility, he realized that there were aspects of the organization that he fundamentally didn't understand. Captain Rodriguez was coordinating the immediate response when he made a suggestion that caught everyone's attention. "We need to bring Martinez into this immediately. She's been tracking suspicious activity patterns for months, and her analysis could be crucial for understanding whether this is connected to ongoing investigations." Crawford's confusion was evident to everyone in the room. "Martinez? You mean the clerk from the administrative wing? What could she possibly contribute to a cybersecurity incident?" The silence that followed his question was uncomfortable. Chen exchanged glances with Rodriguez, both of them realizing that Crawford's ignorance about Sarah's real role was about to become a serious problem. Rodriguez made a quick decision that would change the dynamics of the entire situation. "Sir, I think there are some things about Ms. Martinez's position that you may not be aware of. Perhaps we should have her join us so she can brief you on her recent work." 20 minutes later, Sarah Martinez walked into the Emergency Operations Center carrying a thick folder of documents and a laptop computer that looked far more sophisticated than the standard equipment issued to administrative staff. Her demeanor had changed completely from the quiet clerk that Crawford had observed over the previous months. Sarah's transformation was remarkable. Gone was the hesitant administrative assistant who took notes in the background of meetings. In her place stood a confident intelligence professional who clearly understood the gravity of the situation and her role in addressing it. She moved through the operations center with the purposeful efficiency of someone who belonged in high-stakes security environments. "I've been expecting something like this," Sarah said as she opened her laptop and began connecting to secure networks that Crawford hadn't known existed within the facility. "The pattern analysis I completed last week indicated a high probability of coordinated attack within the next few days." Crawford stared at the computer screen as Sarah pulled up detailed charts showing network activity patterns, suspicious login attempts, and communication anomalies that she had been tracking for months. The analysis was sophisticated and comprehensive, clearly the work of someone with advanced training in cybersecurity and intelligence analysis. "You've been conducting this kind of analysis for months?" Crawford asked, his voice betraying his confusion about how he could have been so wrong about Sarah's capabilities. "It's part of my actual job responsibilities," Sarah replied matter-of-factly as she continued working on her computer. "The administrative duties provide necessary cover for intelligence coordination activities." Chen watched Crawford's expression change as he began to understand the implications of what he was hearing. The woman he had planned to terminate in 10 days was actually a highly trained intelligence professional whose work was critical to facility security. His efficiency analysis had completely missed the most important aspects of her position. Sarah's investigation over the previous months had identified several concerning patterns that suggested insider threat activity. Someone with authorized access to classified systems had been making unusual queries and accessing information outside their normal job responsibilities. The current attack appeared to be the culmination of a long-term intelligence gathering operation. The attackers have inside knowledge of our security protocols, Sarah explained as she traced the attack vectors on her computer screen. They're avoiding detection methods that aren't publicly known, which suggests either current or former employee involvement. Rodriguez leaned over Sarah's shoulder to examine her analysis. Do you have any suspects based on your monitoring? Sarah pulled up another screen showing access logs and behavioral patterns for several facility employees. 3 individuals have exhibited suspicious activity over the past 6 months. All 3 have access to the systems currently under attack, and all 3 have made information requests that don't align with their assigned responsibilities. Crawford found himself completely out of his depth as the conversation continued around him. The people he had dismissed as bureaucratic functionaries were actually conducting sophisticated intelligence operations that he hadn't even known existed. His entire assessment of the facility's operations had been based on incomplete understanding of what actually happened within the organization. The most shocking revelation came when Sarah identified one of the insider threat suspects as someone from Crawford's own efficiency team. The person had used access granted for personnel review purposes to examine classified information that wasn't relevant to budget analysis. Sarah had been monitoring this activity and preparing a report when the current crisis began. Johnson has been accessing personnel files for people with high-level clearances, Sarah explained, pointing to specific entries in her access logs. He's also been downloading organizational charts that show relationships between different intelligence units. Crawford felt a chill as he realized that his own reorganization efforts had potentially been compromised by hostile intelligence operatives. The efficiency expert he had brought with him from his previous consulting firm had been using his position to gather sensitive information about facility operations. Rodriguez immediately ordered Johnson's access suspended and initiated procedures for his detention and questioning. The security breach was more serious than anyone had initially realized, involving not just external attacks but also insider threat activity that had been ongoing for months. Sarah continued coordinating the facility's response to the cyber attacks while simultaneously providing briefings on her insider threat investigation. Her expertise was clearly essential to understanding both the current crisis and the broader security implications for facility operations. As the immediate crisis was brought under control, Crawford began to understand how completely he had misunderstood the organization he had been hired to restructure. The quiet administrative clerk he had planned to eliminate was actually one of the most important security assets the facility possessed. Chen approached Crawford during a brief lull in the emergency response activities. I think you can see why we were concerned about the proposed personnel changes. Some positions are more critical than they appear on standard organizational charts. Crawford nodded, feeling embarrassed about his assumptions and concerned about what other mistakes he might have made in his analysis. How many other people have I misidentified in my reviews? That's something we'll need to discuss in detail once this crisis is resolved, Chen replied diplomatically. But I think it's safe to say that your efficiency analysis may need some significant revisions. Sarah looked up from her computer as the last of the external attacks was successfully blocked. The immediate threat has been neutralized, but we need to conduct a comprehensive review of all systems that may have been compromised. This investigation will probably take several weeks to complete. Crawford realized that far from being eliminated, Sarah's position would need to be expanded to deal with the security implications of the attack. Her expertise would be essential not only for investigating the current incident but also for preventing similar breaches in the future. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. The efficiency expert who had been brought in to eliminate redundant positions had actually created security vulnerabilities by failing to understand the real functions of the people he wanted to remove. His cost-cutting measures could have seriously damaged national security operations. As the Emergency Operations Center began returning to normal, Crawford found himself facing a complete reassessment of his approach to organizational efficiency. The metrics and analysis methods that had worked in private sector consulting were clearly inadequate for evaluating government operations that involved classified activities and national security responsibilities. The aftermath of the security crisis revealed layers of complexity that Crawford had never imagined existed within the facility. Over the following days, as investigators pieced together the full scope of the intelligence operation that Sarah had uncovered, Crawford found himself receiving education about government operations that fundamentally changed his understanding of his role. Director Harrison, the facility's senior administrator, called an emergency meeting for the following Monday morning. Harrison rarely involved himself in day-to-day operations, preferring to let department heads manage their areas of responsibility. But the security incident had implications that extended far beyond the facility itself, requiring his direct intervention. The meeting took place in a secure conference room that Crawford had never seen before, located behind additional security barriers that required special clearances to access. The attendees included representatives from multiple intelligence agencies, senior facility staff, and external security consultants who specialized in damage assessment for classified operations. Sarah sat at the main conference table as an equal participant rather than a note-taking observer. Her transformation from administrative clerk to intelligence professional was now complete and permanent. The cover story that had protected her work for 3 years was no longer necessary or sustainable given the public nature of her role in resolving the crisis. The briefing began with a comprehensive overview of the intelligence operation that Sarah had been conducting under her administrative cover. Her real assignment had involved much more than monitoring internal communications and tracking suspicious activities. She had been coordinating information sharing between multiple agencies while investigating potential security vulnerabilities that could be exploited by foreign intelligence services. Crawford learned that several other employees he had evaluated for termination were actually intelligence professionals working under similar cover arrangements. His efficiency analysis had inadvertently targeted some of the most critical personnel in the facility, people whose real jobs were so classified that their importance couldn't be documented in standard personnel records. The investigation into Johnson, Crawford's efficiency expert, revealed an even more disturbing picture. Johnson had been recruited by hostile intelligence operatives specifically to obtain a position that would give him access to sensitive government facilities. His credentials and work history were legitimate, but his ultimate loyalties lay elsewhere. The timing of this reorganization effort wasn't coincidental, explained Agent Martinez from the FBI's Counterintelligence Division. Our adversaries have been using budget pressures and efficiency initiatives as opportunities to place operatives in positions where they can gather intelligence about government operations. Crawford felt sick as he realized that his entire reorganization project had been compromised from the beginning. Johnson had been feeding information about facility personnel and operations to hostile intelligence services while helping to identify which employees should be eliminated. The cost-cutting measures Crawford had implemented were actually serving enemy intelligence objectives. Sarah's investigation had identified this pattern months earlier, but she hadn't been able to act on her suspicions without compromising her own cover or alerting potential hostile operatives that their activities had been detected. The cyber attack had actually provided the perfect opportunity to expose the insider threat while maintaining plausible explanations for how the security breach had been discovered. Director Harrison addressed Crawford directly as the briefing continued. Your efficiency analysis was actually quite useful, but not in the way you intended. Sarah was able to use your personnel evaluations to identify which employees the hostile operatives were most interested in eliminating. Their targets were consistently people with access to sensitive information or critical operational roles. The realization that his work had been turned against him was humiliating, but Crawford began to understand how he could contribute to damage control efforts. His business analysis skills could be valuable for assessing the extent of information compromise and developing strategies for protecting ongoing operations. Over the next several hours, Crawford received a crash course in intelligence operations and national security protocols. He learned about classification levels, compartmentalized information, cover arrangements, and the complex relationships between different government agencies. The facility he thought he understood was actually a small part of a vast intelligence infrastructure that operated according to rules he had never encountered. Sarah played a central role in explaining how legitimate government efficiency efforts could be protected from hostile intelligence exploitation. Her recommendations included enhanced background investigations for consulting personnel, restricted access to sensitive personnel information, and improved coordination between efficiency teams and security officials. The key is understanding that not all government inefficiency is actually inefficient, Sarah explained during one of the briefing sessions. Some apparent redundancies are actually security measures, and some seemingly unnecessary positions are actually critical for intelligence operations. Crawford found himself developing genuine respect for Sarah's expertise and professionalism. Her ability to maintain an effective cover story while conducting sophisticated intelligence work demonstrated skills that far exceeded anything he had encountered in private sector consulting. She had successfully deceived him and everyone else in the facility while actually performing one of the most important jobs in the organization. The investigation into Johnson's activities revealed that hostile operatives had obtained detailed information about facility personnel, operational procedures, and security arrangements. Several ongoing intelligence operations had to be modified or terminated because of potential compromise. The damage assessment would take months to complete, and some effects might not become apparent for years. Crawford's role in the facility underwent a complete transformation as a result of the crisis. Instead of implementing cost-cutting measures, he was assigned to work with security officials to develop new protocols for protecting sensitive operations from future infiltration attempts. His business analysis background proved valuable for identifying operational vulnerabilities that could be exploited by hostile intelligence services. Sarah's new position eliminated any pretense of administrative duties. She was officially designated as the facility's deputy director for internal security, with responsibilities for coordinating counterintelligence activities and monitoring potential insider threats. Her office was relocated to the secure area of the facility, and her salary was adjusted to reflect her actual qualifications and responsibilities. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on anyone involved. Crawford's efficiency initiative had actually made the facility more secure by forcing the hostile intelligence operation into the open where it could be detected and neutralized. Sarah's investigation had been successful beyond her original objectives, not only identifying insider threats but also exposing a broader intelligence operation that threatened multiple government facilities. 3 months after the crisis, Crawford submitted his final report on organizational efficiency to Director Harrison. The report included recommendations for protecting sensitive operations while still achieving legitimate cost savings in areas that didn't involve national security considerations. His understanding of government operations had been fundamentally changed by his education in intelligence activities. Sarah's success in resolving the security crisis led to recognition from multiple intelligence agencies and offers of promotion to positions with even greater responsibilities. But she chose to remain at the facility where she could continue developing innovative approaches to insider threat detection and counterintelligence coordination. The facility itself became a model for other government organizations trying to balance efficiency initiatives with security requirements. Crawford's transformed approach to organizational analysis was adopted by other consulting firms working with government clients, helping to prevent similar infiltration attempts at other facilities. Crawford often reflected on how wrong his initial assessments had been about the people working around him every day. The quiet clerk who seemed expendable had actually been one of the most important employees in the entire organization. His experience taught him that effective leadership required understanding not just what people appeared to be doing, but also why their work might be more important than it seemed. Sarah continued her morning routine of arriving at exactly 7:30 a.m., but now she walked through different security checkpoints that led to areas of the facility where the real work of protecting national security took place. Her transformation from anonymous administrative assistant to senior intelligence professional was complete, but her dedication to protecting the country's interests remained exactly the same. The attempted removal that had started everything ultimately revealed that some people's true value only becomes apparent when others try to eliminate them. Sarah's ID badge now opened doors to the highest levels of security clearance, but the most important door it had opened was the one that led to recognition of her real contributions to national security. Sometimes the most critical employees are the ones who work hardest to remain invisible, until circumstances force their true importance into the light.